Senators on the Judiciary Committee grilled Attorney General Pam Bondi on Capitol Hill today. It is the first time Bondi has testified before the panel since her confirmation, and she pushed back against questions from Democrats on several issues, including investigations into President Trump's adversaries, National Guard deployments, and the Jeffrey Epstein files.
It was quite a scene as Attorney General Pam Bondi faced a flood of questions on various issues, including the handling of the Jeffrey Epstein files and the tragic shootings of 2 U.S. citizens in Minnesota by federal officers. The exchanges were heated, with Bondi trading barbs with lawmakers and even getting into some shouting matches, leaving plenty of questions still hanging in the air. And right behind her were Epstein survivors witnessing the whole tension unfold. Notably, a federal judge recently dealt a massive blow to Bondi's ambitious tough on crime plan. In a ruling that spanned 35 pages, the judge, Timothy Kelly, appointed by Trump, called her approach a sham, indicating she manipulated the procedure from the start. He firmly stated that the government can't run phony reviews just to back up decisions already made.
You know, Senator Durbin, I find it very interesting that you refused repeated Republican requests to release the Epstein flight logs in 2023 and 2024. I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate President Trump. And currently, the National Guard are on the way to Chicago.
The judge looked at Bondi's actions and clearly told her that this isn't how the law operates nor how due process works. It's a pretty stark reminder that the Constitution isn't just some loose guideline to be ignored, because these are prisoners that most folks aren't shedding tears for. And just to clarify, the judge wasn't saying these individuals should be set free or that they're innocent. He was actually reinforcing the principle that everyone deserves due process, regardless of their situation. It's honestly hard to believe he just came out and said that. This federal judge, who was appointed by Trump, openly acknowledged that these men committed some of the most horrific crimes possible. He didn't hold back, but what he said next should really catch everyone's attention. He remarked, "The Constitution protects notorious prisoners and law-abiding citizens alike, and the process the government provides cannot be a sham." That's a direct quote about what Pam Bondi's Justice Department was attempting to do. Now, here's the kicker. This whole situation unfolds while Bondi was enduring 5 hours of absolute chaos at a House Judiciary Committee hearing.
Senator Schiff, as I stated earlier, I was not in office. I was not confirmed when that was handled.
So does that mean
Deputy Attorney General Blanche and Director Patel said that there was no evidence.
Bondi seemed to dodge the heat, but when they brought up Tom Heyman and his alleged bribery, she was asked directly about a claim that he took a $50,000 bribe. Instead of giving a clear answer, she tried to deflect, insisting that she had already answered that question numerous times. Throughout this chaotic hearing, Bondi was criticized for not looking at the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse sitting right behind her. These women trafficked, raped, and whose lives were completely shattered were there emotionally exposing their scars.
You apologize to the survivors in your opening statement. Attorney General Bondi,
no, can I finish my answer?
No, I'm going to reclaim my time because I asked you a specific question. You taking responsibility for your Department of Justice and the harm that it has done to the survivors who are standing right behind you and are waiting for you to turn to them and apologize for what your Department of Justice has done.
Bondi, on the other hand, would not apologize for her department leaking their private information, brushing it off as theatrics. Can you imagine? She had survivors raising their hands, expressing that the Justice Department hadn't even bothered to meet with them, and she calls that theatrics. This is someone who's meant to be standing up for victims but can't even face them. So, it's been a pretty rough week for Pam Bondi, and not in a good way. Let's dive into the details and break this all down. Let me take you through this situation step by step, because it's quite the story. Back in December of 2024, as President Biden was wrapping up his term, he made a significant move by commuting the death sentences of 37 out of 40 prisoners on federal death row, changing their sentences to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While these individuals will still serve life sentences, they'll never be released. Biden's choice stemmed from his moral opposition to the death penalty, and he wanted to use his power as president to address that issue. Naturally, this didn't sit well with Trump. He was absolutely livid about it. So the very first day he took office in January of 2025, he wasted no time signing an executive order. In this order, he instructed Attorney General Pam Bondi to make sure these changed sentences were treated in a way that matched what he considered the severity of their crimes and the risk they posed. It's pretty striking when the president openly calls for harsher treatment of specific inmates because he disagrees with the previous administration's decisions. Bondi, ready to step up to the plate, took to television and boldly asserted that these men would spend their lives at ADX Florence, a notorious supermax prison in Colorado, often referred to as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This place is known for being the most restrictive prison in the entire federal system. It's where high-profile criminals like the Boston Marathon bomber and El Chapo end up, as well as the UNA bomber. The conditions are intense. Inmates live in cells barely bigger than a parking space and have little more than a sliver of sky to look at outside their window. One former inmate even recounted going 13 days without hearing another person speak. This is not your average prison. It's in a league of its own. Now, what really cuts deep for Bondi is where the judge stepped in. The Bureau of Prisons has a specific process to determine where inmates should be housed. It's all based on individual evaluations that consider factors like security risk, behavior, health needs, and potential threats to others. Before Trump took office, that very bureau had already assessed all the inmates whose sentences were commuted. Despite the push from the administration, not a single one of them was deemed suitable for transfer to ADX Florence. Not one. The system that exists to assess these situations was clear in its decision. It's interesting to see how things change so quickly. Initially, decisions were made regarding the placement of prisoners with the Supermax facility deemed inappropriate based on each individual's profile. But then a new administration came in and everything flipped upside down. Christopher Sinsville, an attorney with the Bureau of Prisons, acknowledged that the transfers to ADX Florence weren't actually based on the necessary security assessments or the resources available. Instead, they were driven by Trump's executive order and Pam Bondi's memo. In simpler terms, the experts said no, but the political figures pushed their agenda instead. They even ran a fake review process just to give it a facade of legitimacy, which is what the judge referred to when he labeled it an empty exercise. Hearings were held, appeals were filed, and all the paperwork was submitted. Yet the results were preordained before any of these activities even took place. Judge Kelly pointed out that it was hard to believe lower-level prison officials felt they could disagree with decisions already publicly made by the president and the attorney general. Naturally, they wouldn't voice opposition. After all, their superiors had already announced on national television where these prisoners would end up. What choice did they really have? Saying no to the attorney general was not an option. The judge critiqued the entire process as a cookie-cutter operation, producing 20 identical outcomes, all sending the same individuals to the place the president had declared before the so-called review even started. This clearly doesn't represent due process. It's more of a press conference backed by some paperwork. Adding to the drama, the timing of the judge's ruling was particularly brutal, as it coincided with what might have been the toughest week of Pam Bondi's career. On the very day the judge was drafting his opinion, she found herself in front of the House Judiciary Committee facing intense scrutiny over the Epstein files. Seriously, it was like being thrown into a fire. Jaime Rashin, the leading Democrat on the committee, accused her of orchestrating a massive cover-up concerning Epstein right from the Department of Justice. He made it clear that she was siding with the perpetrators while brushing the victims aside. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal even called on Bondi to turn around and face the survivors seated behind her, women who had suffered such terrible abuse and had their personal details leaked by the DOJ. I really can't believe how things unfolded when they released the Epstein files. Every single survivor in the room raised their hand when someone asked if the Justice Department had refused to meet with them. It was unanimous. Meanwhile, Bondi sat there looking straight ahead, completely ignoring the situation. She insisted she wouldn't get in the gutter, dismissing the survivor's plea for an apology as mere theatrics. When the subject of Trump's connection to Epstein came up, because honestly, that's the big issue no one can avoid, she sidestepped it by rambling about the stock market. A congressman brought up sex trafficking, and out of nowhere, she mentioned the Dow Jones. It's hard to believe how ridiculous this all sounds. And the frustration isn't just coming from Democrats. Even conservative media figures and folks who usually support Trump are calling this a disaster. Joe Rogan pointed out how poorly the handling of the Epstein files looks and questioned why nothing has been fully released. A far-right broadcaster was calling for Bondi to either be fired or resign. Plus, Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, who helped craft the law meant to release those files, really grilled her during the hearing over how the department was over-redacting the names of important people while leaking the survivors' private details. Now, there are wild claims that the Department of Justice was monitoring which members of Congress were checking out the Epstein files. It feels like they were spying on lawmakers, watching what they were digging into. Democrats are jumping all over this, calling it a covert surveillance operation and demanding Bondi put a stop to it right away. What a chaotic scene. It really feels like this attorney general is losing control of every single narrative out there. She's dealing with the Supermax plan, the Epstein files issue, the prosecution of political opponents, and her response to all of it is to lash out at anyone who asks questions while showering praise on Donald Trump as if he's rewarding her for it. Let's take a moment to unpack what all this truly means. Not just for Bondi or Trump, but for the entire country. We're noticing a pattern that's impossible to overlook, and it stretches far beyond just one judge halting a prison transfer. Here's the gist. The Trump administration rolls out these big, tough-sounding policies, heads to the media to make grand promises, puts their name on executive orders, and then when it hits the legal system, everything seems to fall apart. It's fascinating how time and again, when actual judges and lawyers get involved, it all falls apart. The grand jury just didn't see enough to indict the 6 Democratic lawmakers. And it wasn't just that. A judge stepped in to stop Heggs from demoting Mark Kelly, and another judge recently said no to those Supermax transfers. The Supreme Court even blocked the National Guard's deployment to Chicago, and judges have tossed out cases against James Comey and Letitia James. Oh, and let's not forget that grand juries have refused to re-indict James twice. It seems like the courts have become the one place that consistently says no to this administration. Every time they run headfirst into that wall, they act surprised when they feel the impact. Take the Supermax ruling as a perfect example. What the judge actually said wasn't that you can never send those prisoners to ADX Florence or that the conditions there are unconstitutional. What he pointed out was that the whole process just wasn't genuine. You can't have the president and the attorney general shouting from the rooftops about where prisoners are headed and then pretend that the internal review was somehow an independent and fair process. This ruling is incredibly specific and narrow, which is partly what makes it so devastating. The judge didn't need to tackle any big constitutional questions about prison conditions or executive power. All he had to do was look at what Trump and Bondi said publicly, compare it to the behind-the-scenes happenings, and realize that the review was nothing more than a rubber stamp. They effectively set themselves up for failure. Their own words on camera were what led to their downfall. Now you might be thinking, B, why should I care about death row inmates? Well, the principle goes beyond that. It matters because due process is about everyone. It ensures that the government can't just decide your fate without a real hearing. The review process has to be genuine, not just a show. If they can bypass these rules for the most despised prisoners, they can certainly do the same for anyone. This isn't some slippery slope theory. It's exactly what's unfolding right now within the entire Justice Department. They've dodged protocol trying to indict 6 members of Congress for making a video, and they've sidestepped proper procedures when going after the Federal Reserve, too. It's pretty wild how things unfold sometimes, especially in Wisconsin, where they just went ahead and arrested a county judge completely ignoring the rules. It's like a pattern at this point. Political decisions come first, and then they scramble for some legal justification. If that doesn't work out, they just attack the judge and start over. One of the clearest examples of this is the Supermax case, where an attorney from the Bureau of Prisons outright admitted that the transfers had nothing to do with security concerns. He literally said it was because of Trump's executive order and a memo from Pam Bondi. Just like that, skilled professionals who actually know how to manage prisoners were brushed aside by political appointees who just wanted some headlines. Now let's connect this back to Bondi Bondi and what she's facing. Her credibility, which is absolutely crucial for an attorney general, is being shredded from all sides. First off, her department leaked sensitive information about survivors related to the Epstein files, refused to meet with victims, and redacted the names of powerful individuals while exposing the identities of the abused. Then she sat in front of Congress and dismissed questions about it as just theatrics. Even conservative voices from Trump's own circle are calling for her to step down. Things have gotten even messier with the Department of Justice being accused of spying on lawmakers looking into the files. And Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, he just admitted he hung out at Epstein's Island despite saying he cut ties with him ages ago. Amidst all this chaos, Bondi hasn't brought any indictments against Epstein's co-conspirators. Not a single one. She's been Attorney General for over a year, and the tally for new Epstein prosecutions is still 0. On top of that, Ghislaine Maxwell, who's been convicted for her crimes, was moved from a federal prison in Florida to a minimum security camp in Texas, typically a place she wouldn't be eligible for as a sex offender, right after she had a 2-day meeting with Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General and Trump's former personal defense attorney. Let that sink in. A convicted sex trafficker getting a cushier spot while Bondi is out there claiming she'll toss commuted death row inmates into one of the most isolated prisons in the country. The way these priorities play out is telling, and honestly, as we head toward the midterms, this is a complete nightmare scenario for the administration. The Epstein situation really has a way of cutting across party lines, and it's something that even Trump's supporters care about. You know, those MAGA folks were some of the loudest voices pushing for the files to be made public. But now they're just watching Pam Bondi mishandle everything. They see the Department of Justice defending powerful figures while the victims are left in the open. And then there's Bondi proudly talking about the stock market when someone brings up child sex trafficking. To be honest, that doesn't look good for anyone involved. Adding to that headache, there are judge after judge, some appointed by Trump himself, who are just shutting down the administration's legal antics. We've got rulings regarding Supermax facilities, the Kelly ruling, the rejection from the grand jury, Comey's dismissal, and the James dismissals. At some point, this stops feeling like bad luck and starts to resemble incompetence, or maybe even a calculated strategy. It seems the goal isn't really to present solid legal policies that stand up in court. Instead, it's about putting on a show, chasing headlines for the TV segment, or a post on Truth Social. So where does all this leave us? We've got Bondi, our Attorney General, whose reputation is pretty much in ruins. The Justice Department continues to face humiliation in court, and the Epstein investigation hasn't brought forth a single new indictment. Oh, and a Trump-appointed judge just dismissed the whole Supermax plan as a sham. Bondi had aspirations to be the face of law and order for this administration, aiming for headlines about toughness, punishing criminals, and keeping the worst offenders locked away. But she seems to have skipped over something that every first-year law student learns in Constitutional Law 101. The process matters. How you handle things truly matters. You can't just bypass the rules because the people you're targeting aren't exactly beloved. Running a bogus review and passing it off as due process doesn't cut it. Announcing outcomes before hearings even start doesn't make the hearing genuine. And sitting in front of Congress with abuse survivors behind you calling their suffering theatrics, that's a misstep. Judges will take note, grand juries will take note, and the public definitely will eventually. Maybe not today or this week, but eventually. The tally of all these losses, these reprimands, and the moments where the courts say no while the Attorney General acts like she doesn't care will add up. The way things are piling up really defines the story of this administration's Justice Department. It's not about being tough on crime or sticking to law and order. Instead, it feels like a lot of noise and flashy promises that fall apart the moment someone with a law degree and a gavel takes a good look at the Constitution.